Good afternoon, everyone. This is Kiran Mann and my co-host Sadita Hassi. Our sincere apologies for running out late. We were having some serious technology issues in the background to get our speaker on board. All is well now, so hopefully we'll catch up the time that we have missed. So good afternoon, everyone. Nice to have you all with us. We represent the Human Development and Leadership Division of the American Society of Quality. This is a global division aiming to enrich the personal and professional lives of our members and non-members across the global community. We continuously look for new speakers within the range of our body of knowledge, which can be found in MyASQ HD&L community site. We host monthly webinars, so if you are interested or if you know of anybody that is interested, we would be happy to review their applications. Before we begin the webinar, let me go over some webinar rules. If there is any question or comment, please type under the question tab and we will be happy to answer throughout the webinar and save the questions for the speaker in the very end. The webinar will be held for 45 minutes and then we will have a Q&A session for 15 minutes. Those who attend for 40 minutes will receive 0.1 CEU through an email, which you can save and use that to claim your credit with ESQ. We're very delighted to introduce to you today Jeremiah Genest, and Jeremy is a director of quality at Vertex Pharmaceuticals in Boston and chair of the Team and Workplace Excellence Forum of the ESQ. He will share his lessons on building trust and adaptability in his organization in the midst of pandemic and how that allowed a remote team to drive improvements in the quality culture. He will also provide examples of intent in action as well as the changes he continues to make in his leadership role. So Jeremy, the floor is all yours and I'm looking forward to get some great nuggets from you today.
Great, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. And I appreciate that warm introduction. Again, my apologies on the technology. I think what we've all learned in this last year, 18 months, is that what worked yesterday doesn't necessarily work today and probably won't work tomorrow. And that's part of my journey as a leader who joined Vertex Pharmaceuticals after the pandemic started, in a world that was very different than it just had been a couple of months ago. And the onboarding experience has been radically different. One of the ways of my leadership style that has always been successful for me in the past has been that personal connection, that authenticity that you bring to work, right? Sharing who you are with your employees. I've discovered that that requires different skills, and it has been interesting how to exercise those muscles. And yeah, I've made some mistakes along the way, and it's the recovery from them today that I really want to share. When I started, one of the things I worked really hard with my team to do is to share that authentic self, starting with what makes me tick as an individual and as a leader. So, right, one of the first things I started, and I always strongly recommend this to my mentees and my peers, is I started with a user manual. What's important to me? How do I work? And this is a high level, the document itself. I jokingly call it user manual 5.0 because I'm 50, and next year it will be 5.1. Was really about who I am and what I came in to do, right? How I operate, what I like to get, where I want feedback. And what I found over time is that this has continued to evolve much faster this year than it probably has in the years previous, as a result of this experimentation of trying things out, learning from them, and continuing to improve. The road I want to share with you guys today. As someone who is always, I grew up in leadership, with this idea of servant leadership. It's always been really important to me the empathy, the listening, the healing of an organization. As a new leader, we're there. The building, the commitment, right? The interesting thing, of course, about servant leadership is it's become a buzz term and it means different things to different people. And you can't pick up a leadership book these days that doesn't have yet another version of leadership in it. And that's fine, right? It's all about what makes sense to you. And my distillation of servant leadership has always really been on 4 axi, right? Or 4 principles that I'm here to idolize, to provide idealized influence, right? That I'm walking the talk as a quality professional and of the culture I'm striving to build. Quality culture, what we mean by that, psychological safety, and building organization. You have to do it yourself. You have to be there and you have to show vulnerability and compassion in your work. I strive and pride myself on being an inspirational motivation, right? I'm here to set high expectations for my organization and help them share that vision. I very much pride intellectual stimulation in my style, right? I want my teams to be creative and innovative, to challenge the way we think. I, as a leader, and the reason I joined Vertex was to make a difference, to change things up, to push things forward. And that's very important in my style. And finally, I'm a big proponent of decentralized decision making. My goal is to create a yes, but, and culture. Now, coming in, right, I spent a lot of time with my organization in the first, well, forever, but deliberately within my first 60 days, really realigning as a group on the philosophy of doing, right? How defining that clarity of purpose, having a purpose that everyone understands, understanding what managing to that means. What does effective means? What are the resources we're going to do? How are we going to apply it? How we seek outcomes over outputs. That's part of that servant leadership of healing for me, is that a lot of our organizations prize output over outcomes, and aligning and being able to successfully do that, I think, is a challenge for a lot of us. How we build flow efficiency into our process. Flow has been very difficult, I think, for a lot of people, in that in some places during the pandemic, it's been, for parts of the process of the overall work, it's been very easy. In other places, you've reached eddies and rapids that are new. Building a network of relationship, right? Small world network of relationships is a critical thing. And that is one of the hardest things to do when you have never met anyone face to face. And especially when you're coming into a culture that up to now, and like a lot of our cultures, really prized that face-to-face interaction. Doing this by building integrity, by ensuring that we have the right guardrails in place to help people make good decisions, and then being willing to experiment. I think experimentation is a word that quality needs to use a heck of a lot more than we do. Sometimes we're afraid, especially in heavily regulated industries like pharmaceutical, in that we think, oh, we must be ready to do it before we do it. But experimentation is vital to truly creating a good how. Right? And so I came in here, and as you can see from this, a lot of the things that I've prided myself in being able to do, how we see the situation and how issues become visible, really rely, and even to an extent being empathetic and listening carefully, and the fostering a we belong mentality, were really rooted in my years of experience in face-to-face interactions. And so throughout my journey, it was really focused, throughout my journey, it's because it's not over, it's still continuing. It's how do I be seen and how do I see them? How do I encourage transparency and involve the team and make decisions when, right, we're still figuring out how to work together? And above all, how do I tell the story of who I am as a new leader, as who we are as a new team, that I think all of us in leadership and all of us in quality should be spending a lot more time on is this very thing of use of story for engagement, use of story for proactive problem solving, for nurturing the culture. And that's been my journey for the last 16 months since I joined in May, is figuring this out. And so building this team, building the vision, the communication through transparency to have good decisions, where I was going to proceed. So I came in with this large body of knowledge, with this large understanding that I'm kind of glossing over because, right, this is the body of knowledge that the human development and leadership for a division is all about, as well as the team and workplace excellence, as is the ASQ body of knowledge, right? These are who we pride ourselves on as quality professionals, so that we can accelerate change in our organization, so that we as leaders are building the network approach so that we can create and build and sustain progress. Again, getting back to, right, when I first came on, I was very, very invested in finding as many experiments as possible to really drive through the organization some good things that we could fix. Right? So, and identifying who could be involved and bringing them in and building this army of the willing. I think that for me was one of the fundamental parts, is always a fundamental part and continues to be something I work a lot at, is how do I build an army of the willing so that we can drive change and make it sticky, embed it into the organization and sustain it. And so, right, I came in May 2020, 2 months into the pandemic. I had never met a single person at Vertex who I didn't know from past lives, right? Biotech in Boston is a fairly small industry, even though it's huge. And so you end up knowing everybody at somebody at every company. So of course I knew people. But I didn't know my hiring manager. I didn't know any of my peers. I didn't know my team. And so I came in and with a fairly traditional 30, 60, 90-day plan, right? 30 days, orient and reconnaissance, figure out what's going on, what's the state of the technology and the process, what's the state of the team, and who are my primary allies and who has influence. Then build into a new management structure, clarify, adopt the mission, and start designing the work so that you can start doing your first experiments by 90-day. Sure, I did all of that, but 15 months in, I'm still striving to meet this 90-day ideal. Every month, every day is a new 90-day for me. And I think that's the same for a lot of us now in these organizations, is that we are in a constant phase of flux. And that requires us to adopt. And what I've continued to apply to myself is a continuous learning loop, just like everything else we do. The PDCA has always been at the center of that. Because the pandemic shifted everything. There was never enough communication, right? Empathy and transparency are even more important than ever, and they've always been critically important. And our very definition of flexibility has changed, right? The way we do task interactions, the way team members collaborate on activities is shifted, right? What we tend, sometimes we are over interacting and sometimes we're under interacting. Our process interactions, right? Those structures of the teamwork, the responsibilities and timelines have shifted. I think every timeline has either shrunk or grown and shifts. And critically, our relationship interactions, the way we support each other and share skills is still shifting underneath us. And I think a lot of the debate that we hear now about, should we be returning to work? Should we not be returning? Are we going to fully remote? Are we hybrid? Are we all back in the office? Really focuses around these three things and how successful we are in our organization and our culture, and how successful we as individuals are in applying it. So my first major lesson that I've learned in the last year and some change is that it's not enough to to reset ground rules once, and you do want to do it faster. I came into a well-established team, actually I combined 2 teams. And one of the things I learned is I intended to set the ground rules at 60 days, in the 60-day mark. And I learned very, very quickly that I needed to pull that up. But it wasn't better to wait and learn, that it was important just to have a reset and then be willing to reset again, but also reaffirm. So even though, right, the team norms were set fairly, we did set them before 60 days. What I've discovered is that in times of stress, and I knew this already, I just maybe didn't internalize it as much as I should. In times of stress, in times of newness, in times of oddity like we are in, people are going to return to their old ways of working. So it's really critical to firmly define your ground rules, right? And really focus in on some of the ones that it's easy to take for granted when you're face to face, and be a lot more explicit on that. And I can't emphasize enough how around trust damagers and destroyers, it takes time, right, to truly get people to be honest about this, and several iterations, but also how oftentimes you are finding out what that trust damager is after the fact, and thus you have to rebuild it. And that will shift your team boundaries. It will shift your issue and conflict resolution. It will shift your decision-making practices, and it will certainly shift your communications. So you really want to consider this I have learned that this is a living document. It's not the document that I look at, at the team, on a quarterly basis, which might have been in the past. It's not something you put up. It's truly going back to the principles of visual management. And it's something that you are starting every meeting with, every certain type of meeting with on a regular basis. And that's been hard, right? Because as someone who, again, has been used to physical interactions, visual management has been very critical for me. But visual management is very different in this age of the pandemic, of working remote. And so I've had to find new ways of ensuring that this document is considered living by everyone on the team. And that has really gotten to the point of highlighting a different part of it at our weekly all hands meetings, and then and using this as a coaching tool on a regular basis. So I'm going back to our team ground rules every day. And when they need to change, it's getting people together back so we can agree and find out the right solution. And I think can't stress this enough. This document, we all know how to do it. We all talk about it. Many of us have it, but I think it becomes a much more critical document for me than it perhaps has been in the past. Similar to a communication charter is also much more important. And this one continues to shift. Right? So my team is meeting again next week to revisit our communication charter, because what we have found is that as we do a soft reentry and we have more people in the office, sometimes it needs to shift, right? And so that was the other thing, is that communication charter being very explicit on when to use video and when not to use video. And that shifts when people's energy levels and emotion has shifted over time. And I don't know any of these people, so I'm learning about them through this video. And that has been, and so this has been part of this whole lesson learned, is I can't revisit this stuff enough. And it actually feels sometimes that I'm doing it too much. But that was when I felt like I was doing it way too much, is the level when it actually became valuable to the team. My next lesson learned was pausing to connect more deeply. I must admit, I am a very energetic leader. My style is go, 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 go. Yes, I knew that relationships need time to grow and develop. Yes, I know you can't, it's about investing myself. I know the principles. But what I've really, really learned is that chances are you are not taking enough pauses before progressing. in that relationship, and giving time is important here. Part of that, right, is in that we're in this world of video and conference calls, has been really reaffirming to myself the principles of why am I talking? Again, nothing unusual for those familiar with servant leadership. You probably have thought about a lot. I keep on coming back to these principles again and again and again, is that, and so much so that for a while, I actually had this in front of me, and every time I talked, I was quickly running through these 6 points, right? Of, am I necessary? Am I doing this to build up the team of the person? Am I doing this to build a better future? Is there conviction? Or am I doing it for other reasons? And is it necessary, right? Am I really doing this because it will further the team, it will further the communication, or am I doing it to course correct? And maybe it's a little game playing. Having this tool in front of me was a pain in my neck. I hated it when I first started doing it, but I know I needed it. It's made a difference. It's been something that I one step forward, sometimes a little shuffle to the side, maybe a little bit backwards, but having this to challenge myself, am I speaking from compassion, or am I just frustrated by the pace of things? Going back to that whole take pauses, that this is part of, is I often find that I'm speaking out of I want things to go faster. And at this time, fast is not necessarily the right way of doing things. My team needed me a lot. I mean, seriously, a lot. Probably more than I thought, right? I have a lot of high performing people with years of experience, but I was new to the organization, and this was an unprecedented time. And so it was really about continuously coming back to the 7 steps, right? Of continually going, oh, where am I? How am I using storytelling to provide clear direction? I'm using it information. Were those goals as aspirational as I thought it, right? I used, an X-matrix, like many of the people here, and I joked that at sometimes, except for it changed, right? So I can't get a tattoo, that I should. I was always opening it in every meeting and using that to go back to our idea of fast goals. How we empower, how we create that safe space, and again, giving them space. One of the things that really struck home to me, that really was incredibly insightful for me, was that inventory of skills. Of course, I built an inventory of skills, and I saw where I needed to build skills and where I didn't. Of course, that changed over time as I go, oh, that's not as good as I thought it was. Always made more time for coaching than I thought. Coaching has grown to be maybe the largest amount of time I'm spending in my organization by a lot, like over 50%. And that is still, I could probably give more, right? And so finding that balance and being able to adjust my resources to the goals is important to that. One of the things as a new leader, and I think as any leader, right? When we come into an organization and we realize we're building that organization, we really want to put training and consistency, right? We're bringing in new ideas, we're building. And one of the things I learned to do is that to separate when the team needed to solve problems from the new skills I needed to build, and not try to combine them. That is something that, I'd be like, oh, I know how to solve this. Boom, here's something new. And I wasn't giving them space as a result of that to truly dwell in a good problem solving, right? So finding that balance of bringing in new ways of working, but giving the space for problem solving has been a continual loop for me. Providing support, you're never available enough. You just have to recognize that and understand when it's there. And then upping the amount of recognition. Recognize every chance you get. If you're giving too much, give more. you probably are still not recognizing enough, has been my lesson learned in that space. And that fits into my next lesson learned, which is you need to ensure those mechanisms for informal critical feedback exist as quickly as possible. Don't wait. On day one, be starting to lay the groundwork for informal critical feedback from your teams and from your peers. Right? Building that relational and interactive methodology, right? Setting up that process so that you're creating the safety, right? And that people understand that you're clearly seeking self-improvement. Now, this is one of the things that you can say this. You can say that 100 times, but they don't believe it until they continually see the vulnerability, and it's led with candor. And so acknowledge your weaknesses, be clear with them, demonstrate to them your commitment to develop and make changes, and be very public. This presentation I'm giving is actually part of that very public nature of my saying, here's the stuff I'm working on, and to communicate. This form of self-reflectiveness is something that has been critical to my own journey, and it certainly made me a better leader, I hope, but it has also challenged me in a whole lot of new ways. As a new leader, you're trying to establish in an organization, and as a leader, you're trying to establish, who are you? What do you do? What are your special sauce? Because let's be honest, in all of our organizations, you are still an individual contributor in so many places. And in quality, which tends to be an experience-driven profession, right? The more experience you have, the more you are considered to be a good decision maker. People want to push things up. So as a new leader, everyone wants to push things up. Your people want to push things up. Your peers want to push things up. Your partners want to push things up. Your management wants to push things to you. Everyone is pushing to you. And going back to that principle of speaking less, you really need to. My biggest mistake was enabling this longer than I should. And it continues to be hard to break out of it. So laying that groundwork, going and yes, building the right knowledge, but having communication plans in your organization and playbooks of, here's how we're communicating, this is the methodology for communicating that, and agreeing with that on your team so that they can do all the communication. And you can step back is really critical. Yes, everyone wants to know who you are. Everyone wants to see the leader in the role. But as a leader, the more you can spend the time up front to enable your team by building skills and giving them feedback and coaching and helping and developing that communication plan and methodology and those playbooks, the better it is. And so I spend way more time in those areas than I do anything else. But right, so it's my job. What I'm doing more and more, what I've really learned is, sure, it would be easier for me to set up a half-hour meeting and explain why this is the right thing or to offer an opinion. But what I really am going to do is spend the extra time to enable one of my direct reports or one of my skip levels or skip levels to do that themselves. And that is continual, right? And the more I do that, the more my place in the organization has come better. So I've spent a lot of time there. This one's been one of the hardest, is that everyone is a stakeholder. Everyone knows in their heart that they're a stakeholder and their voice counts, but finding the truly critical ones can be hard, right? And so my realization on this is that, again, one, my stakeholder map changes, not just on the issue, of course, every issue has different stakeholders, but over time, right? As the organization is changing, as priorities change. So again, a revisit often. And then be very clear about who you truly need to involve with. And when I started, I was working to build relationships with people I've never met before. And so I over engage with stakeholders. I engage with stakeholders in the keep completely informed, and even to some degree in the anticipate and meet needs, right? Because I didn't know any better. And so what has been really important, and some of these people I really, really like, I enjoy this. Some of my most favorite people are in the anticipate and meet needs category, but I love them and I love working with them. And what I've had to give up over time is that I need to only be in the manage most thoroughly category. And those people, to be quite honest, were not who I thought was the manage most thoroughly category on day 1, on day 30, on day 60, on day 90, on day 300, right? And so that is been an area for me, is that I am continuously revisiting my stakeholder maps and adjusting who I'm meeting with, and occasionally letting go some meetings that I enjoy, but I realize that I don't need to be there, that governance in my team, or just the fact that our normal communication plan is getting that communication to that person. Because relationship interactions require a heck of a lot more work in these situations. You're spending more time aligning, and you got to schedule post-action briefs for everything now. Do not assume that things that when they're done worked out and then you go on to the next. Always ensure you have that post-action brief, because this is all part of that fundamental concept of psychological safety, and you can't focus enough anymore, right? New teams, when you think about the focus, do, deliver, evaluate, or after action mix of teams, it used to be that new teams were 30% on focus and established teams were about 20% on focus. But the research that's coming out, right, and it's all, it's all in its infancy, but the research is coming out there is saying that focus is now pretty much the same between new and established teams, and it's about 40+%, right? I've seen different different things. So you got to spend more time to focus, and more focus time than you probably wanted to do. I found that activities like 1-2-all and 1-2-4-all were critical. 1-2-all, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is that when a new idea is presented to the team, instead of jumping right into talking about it, it's give people time to think about it, then pair them up. Zoom or whatever your preferred tool of choice, breakout rooms are your friend. Pair them up so that they exchange their thought, their idea, and then have the other person present it back to the team. Or if, depending on the idea, you might go to another level where you get 4 people together and because the 2 people together consolidate their idea and have the one idea between the 2 of them, and then you consolidate down to 1 and present it. There's different formats of this, but using this sort of methodology of deliberation before coming back to the team has really created more safety in the team and more willingness to share, because they get more prep work. And that is increased participation, which has been a thing I have striven for my entire time here, is getting more people involved, getting everyone involved, hearing everybody's voices. And this is one of the tools that has been there. But I have to have the courage to let the culture evolve. There's no magic wand here. And it's just by demonstrating and living to this commitment can you drive this change. So my 3 key takeaways, what I pause and remember to do every day. The first one is I ask myself every day, what actions can be taken to prevent undesirable, unintended consequences with the team, right? What am I doing in all the work we're doing that can ensure that we've captured and identified and prevented undesirables, right? And so focusing on how the organization is responding to the change, thinking it through so that it's holistic for the organization, and again, conducting action after actions, it really drives it home. Asking myself, what actions can I take for success about this, about the team, right? Continually scanning the environment, making sure that I have habits and rituals, like going back to our communication charter and our team norms on a regular basis. You can never spend enough time on role clarity. Wow. I find that is that, especially, when things are changing and you are change as a leader, role clarity, I continue to find. Provide learning opportunities, right? Always be looking at how do I help other people lead themselves through this change. And then again, socializing it at this time is harder and extra work. So spend more time there. And then finally, how can I take evidence-based techniques to be responsive, right? Where are my resistances? And that is where I'm going to spend a lot of time using it to influence, not to burst through them, but allowing them to change me, right? And relying my partnerships to help me ferret those out. So that in short is where I am 15 months, 16 months now into my leadership journey. The questions that I've been challenging myself, the things that I'm working on, and some of the things that have been painful to me. And I hope it gives you some insight into some of the principles that are important in our body of knowledge, and that there are takeaways here that might challenge you as you're on your own journeys. I'd love to open it up to questions and see where the discussion goes.
Thank you so much, Jeremiah. This was it's making us all feel like we want to work with you, to be honest. I'm hearing comments as well. Many questions already starting. I will open it to other people as well who have questions in regard to this presentation or your experience in any area more specifically. I do have some of my own, but I'll ask them offline because I think we have some already starting.
Always.
You seem to talk about servant leadership, but then you are very well prepared. So that's one of my comments, to be honest. I don't think servant leadership is just being nice. As you showed it in this presentation, you are very, very well prepared, and there's a tool for everything that you're doing, it seems like.
That's the mistake a lot of people make in servant leadership, is they think it means being nice. And no, it means being authentic and putting people first, right? Nowhere on the traditional breakdown of servant leadership that I have here is nice. Empathy, self-awareness, foresight, commitment to employees' growth. That's what servant leadership is about. We simplify it by being a nice guy, but I actually think that's a mistake that many of us make.
Exactly. I've had many comments like, just be nice. I'm like, I can be nice, but at the same time we do need to work and get some tools that are beyond ourselves, so that need to actually be followed. Otherwise all this methodology behind wouldn't even be needed. One of the questions basically we have here is, organizations are starting to have some roles about chief happiness office. So one of the questions was like, is that servant leadership? I know servant leadership is a leadership style, but I would like to hear from you. You are talking more of servant leadership on any level. Exactly.
Yeah, I think for me, servant leadership, right, is something that each leader, right, and remember, a fundamental principle is that, like, a lot of the people who, here's one of the challenges that we all have as thinkers in this space, is the people who are making it rich writing books. Well, not rich. The people who are making a living or trying to make a living writing books inevitably are writing about the C-suite, right? And so some of the principles that they apply, you have to think of how to apply them in my own level, right? And that's something that is really important in our body of knowledge, right, here in the ASQ, is that we're looking at how do we apply this throughout the organization. And servant leadership is a great example of that. I think things like chief happiness officer, it's like, I always look at things like that and say, but what are you really doing? What's the actions? What's your plan? What's your process? Like, what's your process for getting happiness? Because if you don't have a system and a set of processes driving it, then it doesn't really exist. It's not, and I think that's part of this commitment is, and this is one of the things that we as quality professionals really bring, is that we're process thinkers. It's one of our pillars, right? Going back to our founders, right? And so that's what we bring to these discussions. And it's really funny. You know, in my role, I spend a lot of time liaison working with HR, and HR always jokes, "You're more HR than some of us are." And I'm like, well, because it has to be as quality, right? This all goes back to Deming's 8th profound principle, right? Drive out fear. And that's what servant leaderships are about.
How long before they think you're crazy for being so planned on anything? Because I understand talking about these, and we've had conferences, I remember ASQ Boston as well. When you talk within these departments, quality department, you bring something out there, they know you're doing a 5Y, even though you might not put the name of the tool in there. But if you're working, because that's what the quality job is, to work cross-functionally and work across the organization, this challenge of explaining to them that you are following some tool there, there is something you're trying to do. Do you always explain what you're trying to do and use as a model, or you just directly, okay?
No, I think it's fundamental, and this is actually a point I make throughout, right, of this presentation, is you actually got to spend more time doing the coaching around these new skills and normalizing them. A great example is the organization I joined. Nobody was using an A3. An A3 was just, you know, and all an A3 is a visual way of presenting a problem or a project so that everyone understands why you're doing it and what you're doing. It's just a one page, right? It's visual management. And there's a body of thinking, but no one would had one. And so like what you'd get were these 30-page slide decks trying to explain a problem. And so it was, so one of the things I tried to, and for a while I was trying to live with them, and I'm like, this isn't working. And I went back to principles, right? Here's what an A3. And then I started doing them myself, right? And I said, hey, everyone should be doing this. Is a great principle. And everything I did in the format of A3, and I still do, right? I think a visualization is really good and have a standard way of doing it. And then encouraging and coaching my people, my teams, so that when someone came to me with a problem, I would then use that as an like, Jeremiah, we need to brief you on this. I'd use that as an opportunity to build an A3 with them.
Start writing it.
And what that's done is it's increased our problem-solving capability, because that's what a methodology does. That's what a tool does. And so we're tool-using beasts. We need to use the tools, and we need to resist. And this happens in every organization. We need to resist the urge of, we're too busy to use the tool, we just got to figure it out, and step back and do it and be firm about it, even when you take your lumps. And I have certainly gone in front of executive VPs more than once and said, I'm taking 3 extra days a week extra on this than you might want, because I'm going to do it right, and it's going to be right the first time. And here's my commitment to that. And I would rather ask that and take my lumps on that than rush to do it in the timeline they want and then be like, whoops, didn't quite get it. That's the balance that I've had to do again and again and again in the organization. And I think all quality professionals are constantly playing that balance.
Totally relate to that. And I think you're a bit responding to also, there is another question about how we can build a highly effective team, if the culture of that team might be a cross-functional team, or might be a team who reports to multiple managers. Basically, they might get motivated in a more in a negative way, let's say, or a less efficient way from other leaders or teams they are cooperating with. Are you using this showing by example? The way you're impacting them, that's what you're using from what I'm hearing?
Oh yeah, and so this methodology, right? I talked a lot about my team, right? You know, people who are in my line in the organization, but equally these principles are ones that I apply to all the cross-functional teams that I sponsor. You know, I've got my share of cross-functional teams. You know, I'm a senior director of an organization. I got a lot of cross-functional teams that I'm in sponsorship of, and spending the time with these teams and helping them is really pivotal. And so the same methodology I'm applying there, and that, and especially that, like giving recognition. One of the things that's really powerful is when you, and again, it's authentically recognizing people from outside of your team is really powerful. So do it as long as you're authentic in it, as long as you're authentically saying, oh yeah, this is the things you did well, you will see that move mountains.
They can feel it. I feel like people can feel when you are just trying to influence indirectly and when you are being authentic and truly believing in what you're doing, basically.
Exactly.
We had some couple of questions, not much time, but I would like to quickly go over some of them. We're talking about some spiritual leaders here in one of the comments, in addition to some political type of Mandela, Dalai Lama. Do you consider those a servant leadership? Or we had a webinar on spiritual leadership as well, which was very interesting a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
Do you see that in them?
I thought that presentation was great. I thought that webinar was spot on. I loved it. And I'm a total secular person, right? I'm an atheist. I'm not spiritual myself, or maybe I am, but it's in a different way. But I very much think that right, authenticity is the critical thing here, right? And being authentic and caring about others as you care about yourself. Oh my gosh, that's like powerful stuff. And I was really impressed. I took a few things out of that presentation around authenticity because I loved what he was saying. Yeah, I loved it. I thought that it really resonated with my own style and the things that work for me and the things that weren't working for me. I learned a lot.
You have a very self-reflective and pausing, and very similar to that approach. I read the book as well. It's very interesting, the reflection point that we need to do to ourselves, but then show it so then other people can feel it and learn by basically watching you.
Exactly. Can't spend enough time reflecting.
And that's the question we have here is what about the leaders who are reluctant to change in the face of new reality? It might be, are you using flexible jobs, remote work, hybrids? Resistant to change is a whole other topic, which we've had in the past as well, I think last year. But what's your approach to that, resistant to change, especially you being a new leader in that organization and remote to begin with?
Yeah.
Did you call them outside of work?
Wow. Okay.
Build that relationship. You mentioned a lot of the relationship part.
Yeah. I do whatever I can. I go back to Kotter's 8 accelerators of change. If you haven't read Kotter, I strongly recommend. John Kotter is an amazing thinker in here. And one of the thing that John said, that Professor Kotter says, I don't know him personally, so Professor Kotter says, is that change happens outside of the hierarchy to be effective. You build a network, right? And so in my case, right, it's what leaders at all levels am I connecting to and bringing into that network? And then you're creating a sense of urgency around the change, right? I'm a quality leader in a pharmaceutical, in a regulated space. So there's some urgency of some of the change I came into this organization to do, or the problems I came into the organization to resolve. And thus you do your problem solving, you do your listening, you do all that design work. And then you got to create a sense of urgency and build as he said, a guiding coalition. And that's where I can influence. Is I cannot influence every leader in my organization, my peers and those above me. I can't, right? That's impossible. There are, at my company, a couple hundred, right? 5,000 employees, that's a couple hundred people. I can't do that. And many of them are resistant. They're the most resistant, right? You'll often have in an organization, and you come in, if it wasn't built here philosophy, right? You hear this all the time. It wasn't built here, it's not worth doing, we need to build it our own way. And you're coming in and you're like, well, there are best practices, there's a body of knowledge about this, let's apply to that. And so what works for me is this whole, what's my sense of urgency? And this is my storytelling, going back into the storytelling. So you build that sense of urgency and you build that guiding coalition, so that guiding coalition working together, you're now a team that develops that strategic view and enlists a volunteer army to carry out change. And some of that volunteer army is my team, some of it is not. Matter of fact, some of the most effective people aren't, and it's enabling them and tapping into that volunteerism. That's how you truly change. And that's how you start working around resistance. And fundamentally, and this is a whole other presentation, it's about being willing to experiment, right? my team is currently involved in about 20 experiments in different areas. Do I think all of them are going to have great solutions? No, I think about half of them are going to fail. But in failing, we will learn a lot, and then we will have something even more interesting. That's hard for us as quality people to admit to. We don't like failure. We like to make things better.
Oh yeah.
But that's how we change our organizations. That's how we truly change the organization. And this, by the way, this graph comes out of a book called Humanocracy. I posted this a review on this on my blog recently. I think Humanocracy is one of the best books in. It was written in 2020, and I think it is probably one of the fundamental books we should all read.
Great. We love books, so that's a great suggestion. You're making me think of another book I read from Cotter was, and actually it was delivered to all our employees in one of the companies I was working for, from executive leadership itself to bring change. Our iceberg is melting, changing, and succeeding. But that as well brings the sense of urgency. And the advocate. Using the advocates, I think that's another item that they were talking about, bringing this change resistance a bit down. No, one question we have here specifically about executive management. I kind of feel these questions are a bit of responses themselves. The role of executive management in supporting you to change you, the change you want to bring in. I think that's fundamental. I don't know if you found.
I mean, you've got to, your manager, you know, at the executive level has to like be committed to you. And that's like a fundamental relationship. And one of the things is that my senior vice president has not agreed with me on everything. Matter of fact, and some things they've been right on and some things they've been wrong on. But they are my biggest and most enthusiastic advocate, and they're not, and they've ensured that I continue to get critical feedback from the organization. And that, I think, is always your executive leadership's #1 job, is to make sure that you're capable of listening and hearing real things in the organization, but also being the one of, yeah, I'm here to support you and I'm going to open doors. That's a big thing, is having those advocates. And one of the things I did is I made sure to find advocates outside of my manager, right? Like I lucked out and I made a connection to someone in, of all things, commercial sales, which for a quality person, not in the pharmaceutical industry, not
We lost you for a second, Jeremiah. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me? Anyways, advocates, build your advocate.
Jeremiah, sorry, can you repeat that? We couldn't hear you for a second.
Oh, I was just saying, in short.
Are you educating them though? Because
yes, you got to educate up and across all the time.
Educating them with quality as well. Okay, yeah, we couldn't hear you at the beginning, so thanks for sharing that. We'll take one last question.
Oh, please.
One last question is about the being introvert, because this word of leadership seems like everyone has to be an extrovert and be out there and have a show or something. So one of the questions is like, being an introvert, does that become like an obstacle basically on being a servant leadership? But I guess you were responding yourself by doing it.
Yeah, I'm an introvert, believe it or not. My favorite thing is, you know, my favorite thing is reading books, hanging out the library, and going to plays and being with my family and my dog. Right? Those are my, and I like weird things. Right? Those are my. That's how I get energy. This is where process comes in. As you see here, my leadership style, and I think all leadership styles, is about process, having the process, the methodology, and the tools to do it. That is what helps you do this successfully as an introvert. And in fact, I think introverts might have an advantage here, is that because you're reaching out of your box, you have to lean on the tools more, where extroverts will have a tendency to wing it, and then they screw it up, right? So I think that I think some of the best leaders I know, and not exclusively, but some of the best leaders I know are introverts, because they have to rely on process and methodology to get things done. not on just their personality and winging it. And so that makes them stronger, because process makes us stronger. And one of the things about servant leadership is realizing that process makes us all stronger. And then you have the self-awareness to improve on it. You're just doing the PDCA life cycle on yourself. You're creating standard work and you're executing to that standard work. And as things come up, you're changing what the standard work is. That's what this is all about.
And that's an interesting book about this as well, called Quiet. You might have heard about it as well. So we would like to share our gratitude for having you tonight. Even the presentation itself is so insightful, and many people have asked. Yes, we will be sharing the presentation on my ASQ community, HD&L, as usual. Also, the webinar recording will be available on our YouTube page this week. So keep an eye for the email that you'll be getting.
And never hesitate to reach out to me on my ASQ and ask questions. I'm always about and more than happy to chat.
You're way beyond servant leadership, even outside of your company. That's I've experienced firsthand, so I do know that. Thanks so much, Jeremy. I really appreciate that. And
thank you for organizing this. This was wonderful. And everyone have a great afternoon, and thank you again.
Thanks, and thanks, Kiran. We will also share the RU credits through an email separate from the follow-up email within today or tomorrow, and you will be getting a survey. So feel free to use that for any feedback or any new topics that you'd like to see. We'll always welcome them. Our next webinar is on September 1st. It's already out there, and it's talking about how we use failures to basically achieve more successes and learn from them. Thanks, everyone, and enjoy this month. Talk to you next month.
Thanks, Adita. Jeremy, I'm saving some questions for talk with you.
Add my list to it. We will get in touch. Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.